friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making an all dies, no stamps card using the new Lawn Fawn Cactus hillside border. So I'm going to die cut the main piece of this die set out of some Lawn Fawn cilantro cardstock. I'm just taping that into place with a bit of post-it tape so it doesn't move. And then I'll take the two little agave plant dies. There's one that's a cluster of two larger ones, and then there's one that's a cluster of three smaller. And I'm going to trim those out of some Lawn Fawn sage leaf cardstock. So I ran all of these through my Spellbinders Platinum 6, and then I can just pop them out so you can see how those are looking. So the cactus hillside actually cuts out the hillside as well, and then there's an additional die in there where you can cut out a separate hillside that will match up, and we'll get to that later. But for now, I'm actually going to pop those cacti back into the negative piece of cardstock because I want to do some ink blending. And I don't want the cacti, since they are kind of tall and delicate, to risk getting all bent up. So I think it's going to be a lot easier to do it this way. So I'm just using a blending brush that one of you actually sent me, which was so kind. So I'm not sure where it's from, but it's just a little blending brush. It might even be a makeup brush. I'm not even sure if it's intended for crafting or makeup, but it's just a blunt little brush, and I am blending on some Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide ink onto just the cacti. I'm going to cover up the agave plants with the other cardstock, so I'm not going to worry about those for right now. So I'm just adding a little bit of ink to the arms and the top of the cacti so that they get like deeper and richer in color. And then I also wanted to do some splatter detail just to give them a bit of extra texture. So I pressed some of that Mowed Lawn ink onto an acrylic block, mixed it up with a bit of water to make it more fluid, and then I'll tap that off the side with a thin paintbrush so I get a fine spray of droplets. And I'll do that until I like how it's looking, and then I'll just set this piece aside to dry. And then I'm going to work on the sage leaf agave plants, and I'm going to add some evergreen bough to those. I think it's a good match. I just cleaned off that little blending brush with a baby wipe so I can continue using it. And I'm going to add a bit of that evergreen bough onto there just to darken up the tops of those plants and give the points a little bit of definition. And then once I'm happy with how those are looking, I am going to do some splatter on them as well. They're super tiny, but I just wanted to have a little bit on there. So I'm just repeating that same process, pressing the ink onto the block, adding a bit of water, and then tapping off with the thin paintbrush. So next I've taken the second of the small stitch rectangle stackables from Lawn Fawn, and I've die cut a couple of pieces of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I've also used that other hillside die that came with the cactus hillside border. I've done two of those, and I'm going to distress these as well. The first one I'm going to use some antique linen distress oxide ink. And I want it to be darker at the top and then kind of soft at the bottom. So that's how I'm doing that. And then I'm going to bring in my second panel, and I'm going to use some vintage photo for this one. I want it to be a bit darker because it's going to be a bit further in the distance. And I'm not going to blend the whole way down because you're only going to see the top of this piece here. So once I'm happy with how that's looking, I'll add a little bit of that vintage photo to the first panel to just darken up that edge. And then I darkened up the edge of the second panel as well. And then I'm going to do some ink splatter with both of those shades on both of these panels as well. So just pressing those inks onto the block, adding the water, and then I'll pick up each of those and tap it off the side with that paintbrush. I really like how the lighter ink looks on the darker inked background. It almost makes it get a sandy texture to me, which is what I'm going for since this is a desert scene. So I'm going to tap both of those onto both panels until I like how they're looking, and then I'll let those dry. And then I have my background piece, which is going to be the sky. I'm going to bring in some salvage patina on the outside edges and then have it just be really soft in the center. And then to darken that up, I'm going to go back to the evergreen bough that I used on the agave plants. I'm just going to add a little bit of that to darken up the outside edges and to tie in those green tones. And then I'll blend that back out with the salvage patina. Once those have dried, I'm going to take the ocean wave accents and tape those into place on the lighter of my two brown panels. This is going to be the one that's in front. So I'm going to pick two different sizes and tape those into place, and then I'll run that through my die cutting machine. I'm just double checking and making sure that that is on there nice and straight. And then once I peel those dies back up, it's going to leave some little cut marks in that background where you can tuck images or die cuts. And then I'm going to take that smaller one and I'm actually going to die cut that 2 more times out of this piece, down at the bottom right and the top left. Then I'm ready to assemble this part of the focal panel, so I'm going to pop that cactus hillside out of the negative again, and then I will add a thin bead of glue to the top of my hillside, my front hillside. My glue was a little bit clogged there, so I just had to clear out the nozzle with the pin that comes with it, but I'm just adding that thin bead of glue only to the top edge and then lining it up with that cactus hillside so that it matches up. And then I'll hold that in place for a few seconds and give that glue some time to dry. And then once it has, I will use my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors to just trim off the extra cilantro cardstock from either side of that. Then I'll take the piece with the 2 extra cacti on it and I will trim those out as well. And I'm going to slip those into the slots that were left behind by those ocean wave accents. So I'm just adding a little glue to the back of those and then tucking them down inside. And I've done the taller one over on the left, and then the shorter one I'm going to add over on the right in that larger of the ocean wave accents. And then I'll pop out all of these little agave plants, and I'm going to add those into the background as well. One of them I'm going to place over top of the green one to cover that up, one of the little ones, and then the remaining agave plants I'm just going to add here and there wherever I think that they look good and where they will fill in the rest of the scene. So I'm not always going to tuck them into the ocean wave accents. I put some of them in front as well just to create a little bit more interest and depth in the scene. This last one I wasn't quite sure where to put it, but I decided to save it for later because I remembered that there is a second hillside. So I'm just going to set it aside for now and we'll add that at the end. So that's how that's looking so far. Now that I have everything secured, I can go ahead and glue the bottom of that piece together. And then I will grab the background and I'm going to sandwich the cactus hillside between the 2 hillsides. So just like that, just give it a tap at the bottom to make sure the corners are on there nice and straight. And then I will adhere this to the sky background. And again, I'm just going to make sure that those bottom corners are nice and square. And then I will pop this into my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiments. So the only stamping I'm doing is with the sentiments. So for the front of the card, I'm going to use the tiny tags saying birthday. And I'm just taking this little happy birthday stamp out of there. I wanted to use something small in scale to match the scale of the cacti. So I'm going to stamp that using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I will stamp that down twice to make sure I have it nice and bold on there. And then I'll set that aside and pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm going to use some Lawn Fawn Noble Fur cardstock that I've scored and folded to a standard A2 size card. And I'm stamping in Noble Fur ink to match, and the images and sentiment are all from the Critters in the Desert stamp set. So it just says, "You desert the best," so you deserve the best, but little pun there. So once I've done that, I'm actually going to take another piece of the sage leaf cardstock, and I'm going to run that through my die cut machine with the honeycomb backdrop. I'm going to tape that into place as well because it is a little bit of a tight fit with the scrap that I had, and so I just want to make sure it doesn't shift. And I did run that through with a metal shim from Lawn Fawn just to make sure that everything would cut out really nicely. And then I'm going to take a little craft pick and release the frame from the die. And I'm going to try to lift this up very carefully because I want to leave all of the little hexagons in the die because then I can reuse them on another card in the future. For this card, I'm only going to use the frame. But before I add that frame, I just wanted to do a little bit of distressing on the card front as well. I was thinking maybe it looked a little bit plain, and I just wanted to do something that would zhuzh it up a bit and tie it in with the focal panel. So I decided to splatter on some of the Mowed Lawn and the Evergreen Bough inks. And I'm just going to splatter that all over the front until I'm happy with how it's looking, and it'll show through in all the little sections of that honeycomb backdrop. So I'll let that dry for a couple of minutes, and then once it has, I will add some liquid glue to the back of that honeycomb frame. I'm only adding the liquid glue to the outer edges. You could also add it to the inner parts if you wanted to, but I didn't want the center to be attached because then it just lifts off the card slightly and creates a little bit of a shadow, which gives it a bit of extra dimension. So I just left it with only the outer edges adhered. And then I'm going to hold that in place for a few seconds until that glue starts to dry. It starts to dry very quickly, and I know that it's on there securely. And then I can grab that focal panel and I'll add some liquid glue to the back of that as well. And I wanted to adhere that a little bit off center, so a little bit justified to the right. So I'm just making sure that it is on there nice and straight, using those honeycomb lines as a guide to make sure that I have an even amount on both sides. I had a little piece of cardstock stuck in there, so I just used the pin from my glue to remove that. And now that I have that all done, I can take that extra agave plant and add that to the top hill right between the first two cacti. And that is actually going to finish this one off. I decided not to add any other embellishment or glitter or anything because it's fairly gender neutral and I wanted to keep it that way. But there was a closer look at the card and another peek at the inside. If you enjoyed this one, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button to let me know. You can also leave me a comment down below. I'd love to read your feedback. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I invite you to do so and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!